and welcome back to the Eat Real to Heal podcast and this special episode, which is one of a 9-part series that focuses on the interviews that I did as part of my dissertation by portfolio for my PhD research at Royal Roads University. Now, this research is really important given the state of our world, the fact that we have so many communities, not just across North America, but globally, that don't have access to clean, fresh, real foods. And what is the reason behind that? So understanding the barriers that prevent people from accessing clean, fresh, whole foods that prevent and reverse chronic diseases is the topic of my research. And I've been so lucky to have 9 incredible participants who gave hours of their time to share their expertise, their knowledge, their lived experience, their traditional ecological wisdom, their everything themselves with us so we can all collectively learn. I'm also really grateful to Royal Roads University for changing the way they allow doctoral students to present their research, the final product. In the past, most research was presented in a manuscript form, 200 or 300 pages that often sat on a library shelf collecting dust with only maybe 5 or 6 people ever reading the research. Royal Roads University, they changed that and they want students to mobilize their knowledge. That means they want students to be able to finish their dissertation and get their research out into the world so the rest of the world can have access to it. In today's age, we have so much research that is closed and locked behind doors that only allowed the privileged to access it versus making it open source and available for every individual, especially individuals who may not have the ability or have the privilege or the financial resources or the capacity to be able to afford to go to school or the desire to go to school, but meanwhile, they still want to be able to access knowledge and learn. Royal Roads University is dismantling the way that knowledge is acquired from who it is acquired because we have to recognize the voices of the individuals with lived experience that often have more knowledge about their communities, their families, themselves, the state of the world, the state of our environment than the academics who sit behind closed doors doing research, but they're never out there with their hands in the soil or it's actually speaking to people. So by dismantling the way research is done and building up a new way that we can mobilize the research that is conducted to allow more people to have access to it, we are centering the voices of the past, the present, and the future, and we are centering the voices of those individuals that don't often get asked for their knowledge and their expertise. So on today's episode, I'm very excited to welcome Dr. Nana Kwaku Opare, who is a medical doctor.
It's a medical consumerism. It's a nutritionist entertainment, and so we feel entitled to be entertained, and we feel like our food isn't entertaining, our food isn't interesting, then we don't want it. It's not worthwhile. And the easiest way to make it entertaining and interesting is to make it addictive.
Yeah.
So you just bliss point people out, and it's very entertaining. You know, dopamine release every time you eat it. You know, it's like, hey. So I don't know what the answer. And hopefully, one of the things that intrigued me about the direction which you're going is essentially the questions that need to be answered. You know, how do you make change happen? And I pray that you gather insight and you're able to synthesize things in such a way that there are action steps that those of us who are interested in actually making an impact can take, actually make a benefit. But things that we've forgotten, things that we've overlooked, things that we don't do, or things that we do that we don't emphasize enough. And I'm praying that you're gonna make an impact on that. And that's why I'm sitting here today, and I'm just basically laying out to you as plainly and as I can what I think is going on.
Now, Dr. Opare is a physician, author, and health coach who specializes in holistic and integrative medicine. He has been practicing medicine for over 30 years, and his areas of expertise include internal medicine, psychiatry, and addiction medicine. Dr. Opare has a strong focus on lifestyle medicine and believes that many chronic diseases can be prevented and reversed through changes in diet, exercise, stress management, and other lifestyle factors. And we agree with him because we do that work every single day at Richer Health through our Eat Real to Heal programs. In addition to his medical practice, Dr. Opare is also a prolific author and educator. He has written several books on the topics related to health and wellness, including The Rule Book and User Guide for Healthy Living, Disease Proof Your Child, which I think every person needs to have this copy and read it, and Vibrant Living, Vegan Starter Guide. He also offers online courses and coaching programs to help individuals and families make positive changes to their health and well-being. Dr. Opare is deeply committed to promoting health equity and has worked to address health disparities in underserved communities, both in the United States and abroad. And currently, Dr. Opare is living and doing incredible work in Africa. And I really hope that you all have the opportunity to do one of his programs. So please head over to his website, get connected with him, and please share this episode if you loved it. Please share it with your loved ones and go back and listen to all 9 episodes of this 9-part Eat Real to Heal doctoral research series. Thanks for being here. I appreciate you. Have an amazing day and an amazing time listening to this episode. So, welcome everybody to the Eat Real to Heal podcast. I am Nicolette Richer, your host, and today is our 8th interview in a series of 12 podcasts that I am doing collectively, that we are doing with our research participants on behalf of my doctoral research. And if you've been listening to the other 8 interviews or other 7 interviews, you know that my research question is, what are the barriers that we see currently that are preventing Indigenous, Black, South Asian people of color from accessing the real quality foods, the real whole foods, the traditional foods that are capable of reversing disease? But of course, within that, there's a whole host of questions beyond what are the barriers, but what are the opportunities? And also, let's go beyond what our current governments are saying are the root cause of the chronic diseases that are afflicting BIPOC peoples at 4 to 10 times higher rates than non-BIPOC people. So we know that the root cause is not obesity. We know the root cause is not alcoholism. We know the root cause is not lack of exercise. We have to go further beyond that to truly get to the bottom, the heart of why BIPOC people are experiencing chronic disease rates at such epidemic highs. And also, not even BIPOC peoples. We are suffering. 1 in 2 people die from heart disease. 1 in 3 people are diagnosed with diabetes. 1 in 2 people are being diagnosed with cancer. And this is a global issue. But really what we're truly addressing is why the rates are higher among BIPOC peoples. So on today's show, on today's interview, I would like to welcome Dr. Opare MD to the show, who has decades and decades of experience in the field of medicine in helping people understand all of these issues that are upon us. So welcome, Dr. Opare, to the show.
Thank you. It's good to be here, and I'm glad to be of help.
I'm very glad that you're here as well. So we got to chat briefly, and so based on that introduction to this interview, I want to hand the floor over to you because you are a voice that needs to be heard in the world, that has been heard in the world, and I am sure you have so many stories. But in addition to that, you have, institutional knowledge that you've learned in university and school. You have real life knowledge. And with the work that I'm doing using narrative inquiry, it's to capture all of those stories for this research so we can better understand what is happening in our world today. So what is the first thing that came up for you when I led with that introduction?
Um, I think, Nicolette, the question is, what difference does it make anyway, on what we eat? And
Hmm.
that has to really be addressed, because within the standard practice of medicine, that's really underplayed to begin with. Um, and so I think scientifically, it's really clear, um, what makes a difference. Um, and but connecting the science and connecting the practice is the question. How do we do that? And that's what we're trying to get at. Choices. Everyone has choices, or so we think we have choices. And so, what drives those choices is I think what we have to get at. Um, and so we have to ask questions of not just, um, appetite or preference, taste, flavor. We have to ask questions not just availability, because just having it available doesn't necessarily make a difference. We have to ask questions of cultural cultural aspects. But I think we have to really dive really deep, um, because culturally, at least, and I think your listeners deserve to hear my background a little bit. I'll deal into that. Um, Culturally, the precedent is there for eating healthy, and at least for my focus, at least right now in East Africa. Um, but let me tell you a little bit about my background. Um, I have quite a bit of formal training, specifically related to the topic. Um, I was born in America, and I'm 65 years old now, and I went to college at Berkeley, finished my degree in food nutrition and dietetics, and then went on to do a combined Master's of Public Health and MD program with Berkeley and University of California, San Francisco. Um, Following that, I did, and having been thoroughly disillusioned in the practice of medicine to the degree that I even quit medical school. Well, I had no intention of going back initially, but during my third year, but I had the presence of mind to call a leave of absence,
Right.
and that's what I ended up making it. And I went on to go ahead and get my MD degree and do my internship, um, and transitional internship. And then instead of doing a traditional residency, I decided to learn some medicine that I thought really was effective and could make a difference, and that's traditional Chinese medicine. So I matriculated at the San Francisco College of Acupuncture and Oriental Medicine, and completed my Chinese medicine curriculum there. Got certified in acupuncture, and then went on to do a dual career, both in traditional Chinese medicine and um, standard medicine, practicing ER medicine, and that later transitioned into primary care adult medicine and addiction medicine and urgent care. And then finally, I think the last 15 years or so of my practice in America, I found that occupational medicine was the least objectionable specialty that I could do. And so I did occupational medicine on one hand, and then on the other hand, I did my combined integrative practice, um, which um, having moved to Atlanta, started out as Opare Integrative Healthcare, and that morphed into the Opare Institute, and now as the Opare African Institute. I immigrated to Tanzania from Atlanta in 2016, and I live currently. That's where I'm speaking to you from is Arusha, Tanzania. I'm in the outskirts of Arusha, Tanzania, in a very beautiful rural place called Usa River. Couldn't get out of America. um, so my interest in nutrition goes back 50 years, and it goes back into, but my interest in veganism really didn't start until well after I graduated from college and medical school, because my medical school taught eggs were the best protein and gave no discussion whatsoever in college or at medical school or anywhere of the value of veganism or the adverse effects of eating animals. But gradually I started learning on my own and doing my own research, picking up interest in fasting, and developed an expertise in juice fasting. And it's one of the main tools I've used at the Opare Institute is a juice fast. As a matter of fact, I wrote a book called The Optimum Fast on my specific technique that I've developed over the years when using a juice fast and therapeutic juice fast. And then gradually I started transitioning how I ate myself, from everything when I was in college to gradually cutting down on the high fat, that beef, pork products, eventually chicken, and the last 5 years or so that I was eating animal products, I only ate fish, and then the last couple of years only very rarely. Since '96, I've been vegan, and during large portions of those periods of time, between was that the last 26 years, I've had periods where a year and a half at a time, several times, I eat raw vegan, and so now I eat a high raw vegan diet, much of which I grow in my own yard here in the Usa River. One of the nice things about this climate in Usa River is we're tropical alpine. We're at the foot of Mount Meru, about 4,500 feet above sea level, which means that I can grow greens and lettuce all year round. And so I pretty much eat greens and lettuce every day, and lots of fruits and etc. My interest in nutrition also has always been from a public health standpoint. So I always was focused on helping as many people as possible heal and avoid getting sick. And it became clear, and it's become clearer and clearer now, especially with the ease of availability of solid research, thanks to a large part upon the singular work of Michael Greger and his team, putting out nutrition facts has saved me hours, untold hours of combing the literature myself, and untold hours at the copy machine copying off articles that I give to my patients, which I no longer have to do. I just send them a link to a video on the topic so they can actually see research on things. So,
and do you find it, can I jump in there and ask, there's a couple questions coming up for me.
Do.
You know, one of the things that you mentioned is the fact that, you know, you've gone through extensive training, medical school training, Chinese medicine training, you know, researching about nutrition. And I'm going to assume you just weren't reading people's blogs, like you were diving into the scientific literature around this, right? So here's someone who has all of this education, but compare that to individuals who've never gone to med school, who've never even gone to post-secondary school. Like, would you say just lack of education is one of the factors that is making our society sick? And it's not from lack of information. We have those published studies, decades and decades of published studies showing that a plant-based diet, that a vegan diet is optimal for our health. But that information is not getting through to medical doctors. It's not getting through to the nurses. It's not getting through to the people who work in the healthcare system. So how are people who use the healthcare system supposed to even know this?
Well, education, you said it in your question. Education isn't the answer because nurses and doctors and dietitians, to a large degree, have education, but they don't have the right type of information.
Mhm.
Um, the I think overall the issue is you can't separate what people eat from the political and economic and social conditions in which they're eating in, and I think that's the main key. There's very powerful economic forces that drive the um, advice that is given by doctors that you see in the news media that are very much invested through interlinked industries in maintaining a poor quality of diet. When I say interlinked industries, I mean agriculture, agropetrochemicals, um, pharmaceutical chemicals, um, insurance industry, medical technology industries all have a stake, and hospital industries all have a stake in maintaining the type of diet that people eat today. And so they, in relationship with their power in the mass media, will continue to put out a stream of misinformation to further their economic interests. And
Mhm.
so the only way to begin to combat that is to actually have some basic scientific background of fundamental basic rooting in nutrition. For example, people say, well, they say you're vegan? Well, how do you get your protein? And then I ask people, I say, well, just I just want to be clear so that we're on the same page. Um, I know what I mean when I say protein. What do you mean when you say protein?
Mhm. Or salt, for example, or what do
Or
salt
salt?
or sugar, like, or fat. What do you mean when I say fat versus, what does this person over here mean, or the person in the supplement company, or, that's the problem is we use these generic terms, but that are actually rooted deeply in science, and science would not be so generic with these terms, but it feels like the public is only hearing these very high level terms, so then it becomes very confusing.
Precisely. So if you don't know what protein actually is, then it's very easy for someone to say, well, you need a lot of protein. If you don't know that you don't need to eat complete protein, quote unquote, complete protein, which I was taught in school. And Berkeley is one of the best schools of nutrition in the nation. As a matter of fact, my advisor co-discovered 3 vitamins, and my chair of the department is one of the main people who did protein nutrition fundamental research at the Human Experimentation Station at Berkeley. They still were saying false information about protein. You don't need to eat complete protein. You just need to eat proteins that have all the amino acids, not necessarily in the ratio that you need to have. So if you don't understand protein, it's easy. If you don't understand, if you're ignorant, it's easy to convince you that you know something, and it's easy for you to believe that you're wise. With that old saying, the people who think they know the most are often the people who are the least informed. And so it's easy to, if you have no basic fundamental background and stuff, to fool you. But at the end of the day, I don't think that knowledge of nutrition is the key, because there's always limitations of science anyway, and science lies, and because there's money behind it. And I mean, the question that we're trying to get at ultimately is let's take Tanzania as an example, or East Africa as an example. In college and studying public health nutrition, it was very famous for East Africa, mostly because of the work of this guy named Burkitt. Burkitt was a English physician surgeon who ended up as the colonial chief of Minister of Health in Uganda back in late colonial time. And he was very famous for his research showing that public health research showing that heart disease, cancer, strokes were exceedingly uncommon in East Africa. Meaning that if you had a patient that had a myocardial infarction, then you would report that to the literature. It's that rare. And he related that specifically to diet. And he did research showing that the traditional East African diet eaten by the average person was plant-based, with very little animal products included. And he most notably was very famous for his work with fiber, in terms of noting out the effects of dietary fiber and how important that is in terms of maintaining your health. So what does that say to me? That says to me that within my lifetime, people of my age and older grew up eating a diet that protected them in East Africa from the main killers that we have today. So there's collected wisdom among the elders who are respected largely still in East Africa for how to eat well and not develop these diseases. So if that knowledge is still in living knowledge, it's not historical, it's living. If that's there and people know how to eat to stay healthy, then why aren't we doing it? Why aren't we doing it? And so I've done a lot of work here in Arusha with the government hospitals, the district hospitals, and work with the diabetic clinic. And we found that in our education with our patients, and diabetes is epidemic in Arusha among the rural population. The rural population, we're talking about the peasantry, the people who live in subsistence farmers now are having high levels of diabetes and other types of metabolic syndrome as well. And so we would work with patient education and tell them, okay, look, this is, all you got to do is just eat like grandma used to eat when she grew up, and you're going to pretty much reverse your disease that you have, and you won't have it anymore. And people could hear that and it could understand it quite clearly, but very few actually did it. And the ones that did reverse their diabetes, and then they come back to the meetings and say, "Hey, look, I can see again. Yeah. I was almost blind, but now that I'm eating vegan, my vision has returned." And people say, "How is that possible?" And we know that it's not only possible, but it should be expected from the research done back in the 40s in North Carolina with the Kempner group, who showed that using retinal photographs, you can reverse diabetic retinopathy using an extreme form of a vegan diet, but vegan nevertheless would do it. So what is it? It's come to my mind, what is it? I mean, the diabetic clinic is packed. mean, we had a meeting with the diabetic club at the district hospital in Arusha or in Tengeru at the first inaugural meeting, and 250 people showed up. 250.
Wow.
And you think people hear you, we're worried about malaria and TB and cholera and all these other diseases, which do affect people. And we're worried about nutrition and malnutrition. Yes, malnutrition does affect children, and the poor people are affected from inadequate amounts of food. But once you get to be grown, what happens? And it's not a matter of knowledge. It's not a matter of opportunity, because in Arusha, you just don't tend your backyard and wild food crops start growing up.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, it's amazing. You know, I hired a local gardener to help me with my garden, and he'll say, "Oh yeah, well yeah, we eat this. That's some chicha." And wild greens start growing in the yard, and passion fruit grows wild. It's a weed, and it's amazing. So you can get plenty of good food here if you just have access to land. And I think that's one of the issues. Access is always the issue now with the urbanization of the populace. But I think we have to take a deeper dive, Nicolette, a deeper dive than that. So if we've got the family, the knowledge of that, why the question is, okay, so why don't you, and I say, go ask grandma. Grandma, well, how do I fix this food? Grandma made you food growing up. She knows all the recipes and how to eat everything. Why are you eating that? It's still ingrained into, I think it's a part of the socialization of people to want to eat in a modern way. It's not just that. I think, well, let me talk about that, and then I'll get on to what I think is even the deeper level. Mm-hmm. I think what happens is that we are, as a product of colonialization, have been conditioned to believe that which is modern, that which is brought by the colonists, that which is brought by the overall Occidental society is good and is to be valued, mm-hmm. and is modern and is the way to go. It's the source of the good life. And those colonized people or enslaved people seek to emulate the colonizers, mm-hmm. because we have been taught that what they do is good and what they do is best. And so we want to eat like they eat. Mm-hmm. And we measure to a large degree our success by how we can emulate them, whether it be in dress, whether it be in employment, whether it be in entertainment, whether it be in consumer goods, whether it be in social or sexual practices, religious practices, as well as dietary practices. And so what I do think is happening is that to a very large degree, the way people choose what they eat is directly related to the degree of their colonized mentality, mm-hmm. or enslaved mentality. How well the mentality has been adjusted to that of those who come in to take over, and our desire to emulate those who have taken over. We seek to emulate them in every way, and diet is just one way. Mm-hmm. So you would say, so that the attitude would be, well, why would I want to eat that primitive, uncivilized diet? Mm-hmm. That's what poor people, ignorant people eat. Yeah. Those plants and those roots. That's not the modern way of doing things. And so what you see here is that you see people spending huge amounts of money on meat. And they'll I mean, guys will go to work and they'll come home. They'll make say 10,000, 15,000 shillings a day. And on the way home, they'll stop and they'll send 5,000 shillings for a kilo of barbecue goat, a kilo. And then they'll wash that down with another 1,000 shillings of beer. So, but before they've even gotten home, they spent 30% of their food on dinner that day, on food that's going to kill them. And if it's not barbecued, it's fried. It's fried potatoes, it's fried fish, it's fried eggs. And so this is the modern way of doing it. And I think that's, to a large degree, what we've got going on.
Well, I want to jump in and just ask you something about that then, because I saw it when I was in Malawi the last time, and I saw all the signs, the big billboards in the cities on the way to my grandmother's village. And it was, Nestle and the soya oil companies selling, get your bag of oil in the little like plastic popsicle tube, so people from the village would ride like kilometers and kilometers and kilometers to go to the closest city to buy oil so that they could fry their food. And yes, we know fried chicken, fried vegetables, fried anything, it does have a very different taste than just eating the vegetable if it's cooked a little bit in water or if it's stewed. So I'm curious if you think just that our flavor profile, like, is it a food addiction to that flavor as well now that has, beyond the knowledge? So you can have all the knowledge in the world, but your taste buds overpower you.
Yes, that's unquestionably true. Fried food is specifically addictive. And that's very, very well known within the food industry. And if you go back, if you look at, there's popular books now, Fat, Sugar, and Salt. I've got it on my shelf here. Talks about how the food industry specifically tailors foods for the specific portion of fat, sugar, and salt to cause addictive relationships to the food. So French fried potatoes or chips are specifically a highly addictive food. It activates addiction centers in the brain just like any other drug. And so, yeah, you do become physically, psychologically, emotionally addicted to fried food or foods with salt and sugar. Or you say French fries, you don't think salty, sugary. But when you eat the starch with the fries, it quickly turns into sugar in your system. So you do get that. That's called a bliss point effect. And so, yeah, we are physically addicted to those types of foods as well as psychologically, emotionally addicted, and socially conditioned to crave those things. Yeah, that's very, very important consideration. And I think that's one of the reasons why I could see that in working with my patients in the 80s and early 90s and 90s. And I said, well, people are acting like addicts. You tell them this and they just can't stop. And then I realized myself, yeah, sure, I'm straight up addicted to potato chips. And so I started studying addiction medicine. And I started practicing addiction medicine for a while and became very active in the field to understand how to approach the addict. And that very much influences my practice today. So yeah, addiction is a really big component. And I think any type of program that's going to interdict this type of issue is going to have to understand principles of addiction and how you address the addict.
Thank you for bringing that up. That's something that hasn't been brought up yet throughout these interviews. And, in Canada, and I know in many parts of the US, access to food is one of the reasons why there are such high diabetes rates, because you don't get access to fresh, real food. You can't access the foods that your grandmother ate because people were thrown off their lands when the colonizers came. They were put on the worst lands possible where they couldn't grow food. They were removed from their practices of growing and hunting and, well, mostly gathering. a little tiny bit of hunting. That's I think a misrepresentation in our current day history to think that people
Hmm.
were big hunters and and minimal gatherers, where it was the opposite. So in Canada, people,
Yes.
what, like one participant said, if the only thing to eat is the Pop Tart or the, box of sugary cereal because it's the only thing you can get in a store, well, what do? Right? In that situation for a lot of people who are of color in our country.
Hmm. Yeah, and then we're talking, it's a political issue.
Hmm.
It's an economic issue, um, and it's an issue of why why are those why can't we get those good foods? I mean, I remember, for example, that even plays out in suburban America. In Atlanta, I lived in probably the overall most affluent Black neighborhood in the country in terms of numbers of wealthy people. I mean, there's a lot of poor people also in that neighborhood, but overall, the numbers of people earning over $100,000 a year was very high.
Mm.
Yet there was no natural food store. Actually, there was one natural food store in the area, but it was a tiny mom and pop store that was running down. But they're opening Whole Foods and Fresh this and all these other national health food stores all over Atlanta, but never in that neighborhood.
Mm.
And so why? Why not? And there's plenty of great locations to have opened. It's not like there wasn't commercial space available. I mean, it was wonderful. They should put a Whole Foods there. I mean, this business is going out of. I mean, it's a perfect place for a Whole Foods. They wouldn't do it. So there's a political will also. There's a direction of a corporate direction on doing it. As to they why aren't they opening this stuff where I I think the biggest there was one other topic I want to talk about. If you don't have any other questions on that line,
No,
is the
you
spiritual
go.
aspect.
Yes, please. Let's talk about that.
Because what we know, and I remember one of my favorite quotes from one of my favorite authors, Gabriel Cousin, from his book Conscious Eating, which is basically the Bible of vegan and raw vegan nutrition. If you haven't read it, it's essential reading for anyone that wants to know how to go about eating vegan and eating raw vegan and why. But he says, um, what you eat is both the cause and effect of your consciousness.
Hmm.
The cause and the effect of your consciousness. So we know that, and he outlines this well in the book, that eating certain foods engenders certain spiritual and psychological and emotional states.
Hmm.
And conversely, certain psychological and emotional states tend to drive one to choose certain foods.
Mm. Right.
So just excuse me for becoming pedantic, but
No.
a little teaching will help here. One of the best paradigms for understanding that was with the Ayurvedic paradigm, understanding the doshas of food, not the doshas, the gunas of food.
Hmm.
The gunas are the spiritual aspect of the foods that you eat, and the three basic gunas. And that my pronunciation this is completely incorrect. So please, those who know how to pronounce these words properly, excuse me.
We
But
forgive you,
there's
and it's
sattvic,
good.
tamasic, and rajasic. The three basic types of foods. And when you eat a sattvic food, it tends to engender a sattvic state of mind, a sattvic state of being, a tamasic food, a tamasic state of being, and so on. And
Hmm.
so those basic states of being correspond to broad basic categories of food. Um, the What you find is that people who have a predilection to a certain mental state are going to be very unlikely to choose the food outside of that mental state. You naturally are drawn to eating food that reflect your pre-existing mental state. So, and if you are forced to eat a certain food, it's going to change your mental state. So basically, sattvic means is the state of samadhi, of peace, of harmony, of inner elevation to a higher spiritual level. Those are the states that the the rishis and the sages and the priests would try to acquire. The tamasic is the state of poor mental, physical, and spiritual hygiene. It's a state of degeneration. It's a state of fear. It's a state of loathing. It's a state of degeneration. Rajasic, and these are very broad categories. Of course, I mean, there's a lot of overlap, but in general, those, and my explanation of them is pretty rudimentary. But Rajasic is a state of the warrior, of the aggressive, the hyper-violent, the type A corporate raider, the UWC fighter, those who are very aggressive, very violent. And the foods that would correspond to those are the Rajasic foods, are foods like raw, fresh meat. No, I said raw, fresh meat. Or raw,
Not
fresh fish, sushi. And there are also drugs that correspond to those things as well, like cocaine is Rajasic, for example. Whereas sattvic is processed foods, tamasic. Tamasic foods are processed foods, preserved foods, old foods, spoiled foods, overly cooked foods, foods that are typically found in the only foods that are found in fast food restaurants are tamasic. All food found in McDonald's is tamasic. All foods found in any of the fast food are tamasic. Whereas the sattvic foods are living foods, vegetable foods, plant foods, flowers, berries, natural, unprocessed, vegan foods. Those types of foods engender a higher level of consciousness, a higher level of inner peace, a higher level of harmony, and a higher level of connection with the divine. So how do I think that plays into the question at hand? How do I think that makes a difference? Well, if you are in a situation where your environment is forcibly degenerate, is forcibly violent, is forcibly under attack, if there's discord in your life, if you are into a substituted spiritual entity that tells you that you are a negative person, that denies the true sacredness of all things and all beings, and only makes that which is sacred, that's what you get in the church. And then therefore that what you do and who you are is degenerate and bad and evil. You believe that. Then you are your spiritual, your religious education or miseducation is separating you from your true spiritual nature and is engendering a tamasic state of being. So if you go to church, and I always reflect there's a lot of the Pentecostal and other holy roller churches in this area, and they get on the loudspeaker at 5 a.m. in the morning. And one of the things you always do when you're choosing a place to live is go at 5 in the morning
Yes. Go
because
loud.
you'll be able to hear
Yeah.
what it sounds like before you live there. Wish I had
Yeah.
done that with the first place I lived, because these guys will get on the loudspeaker and blast a sermon. And my Kiswahili is very rudimentary, but even if it were, I could barely understand it because they're just so and it's like, wait a minute, that's what you're pushing out on your people spiritually.
Yeah.
So you're feeling that tension in you. So your choices of food would naturally reflect your state of consciousness.
Yeah.
So you'll choose foods that reflect that: old food, stale food,
Yeah.
fried food, overcooked food. And then that and it's a cyclical pattern. So I think it's we have to address the spiritual aspects of how we're of food. And I think at the end of the day, to be quite blunt with you, that I think that the dietary practices of indigenous peoples are a consequence of their colonial state,
Mm-hmm.
and are a consequence of the colonial system of domination and control, and are not just incidental but intentional.
Yeah.
Those practices, because they tend to debilitate and injure the populace, and to make them sick, and they tend to decrease the amount of older, wise people who can spread the indigenous ways, and because people die sooner.
Mm-hmm.
So I think at the end of the day, I think the answer is regaining sovereignty over the land that we live in, and sovereignty over our culture, and sovereignty of the choices that we make, restoring our natural indigenous spiritual, economic, and as well as, of course, nutritional practices. Those are the key issues to help restore the diet. I think as long as we are in a state where we have colonial system of maintaining a propaganda machine that's pushing business products, pushing economic, spiritual, social, and cultural value systems that are in themselves tamasic, to use that term,
Yeah.
then we are going to end up choosing tamasic foods, and we're going to tend to engender that state of being. If you look at traditional Native American, traditional African practices, we're all highly attuned to in vibrational frequency with the sacred nature of all things. Highly in tune to being peaceful and harmonious with the environment.
Mm-hmm.
And that state of mind is the essence of a peaceful state of mind. And that state of mind will tend to lead one to eating a peaceful, plant-based, fresh food way of eating. And that, again, that way of eating will tend to engender that state of mind. So I think, the answer is basically, how, so what are we going to do today? You and I are going to say, okay, we need to have a revolution, although maybe that's what we need. But how are we going to help people in the meantime? And that becomes a very, very difficult question. I don't have the answer to it. Hopefully some of your other speakers have had some ideas. But I think at the end of the day, if your consciousness has been falsified, you've had a supplanting of your basic values of peacefulness and harmony with the environment, with those of the colonizers, then you're going to end up wanting to emulate them. And one of the main ways to emulate them is to eat like they project themselves to be eating. Not necessarily if you look at the hyper rich, they're probably all secretly raw vegan anyway at this point because they're smart enough to realize they want to stay healthy.
Exactly. Well, you know, I'm so glad you brought this up because it isn't what it's been touched on lightly by the other participants, but not nobody dove into it as deeply as you did. And I love the fact that you brought Gabriel Cousins into this with what you eat as both the cause and effect of your consciousness. And through your storytelling, through sharing this, it brought me to this place where, I mean, I can see the diagram, I can see the circle, right? So it's that cause and effect, but it's like what comes first, the chicken or the egg, they say, and now it's like what comes
Hmm.
first, right? Is it like the fruit or the vegetable, the legume, like, and it's now to change. um well, what I see is this 12-step program similar to AA, but for people with
Hmm.
food addiction almost, but where, like you said, nobody has had an answer. There's not one answer because this is such a complex situation because we are complex humans in a complex history, in a complex time. And it's true, we have all these social, economic, political, environmental states that are upon us that there's not one answer to this. But it makes me think, though, through what you just said, is the spiritual aspect of it. And my clients who heal and reverse their disease, they often do say this to me because it is a plant-based diet that they use to reverse their diseases, chronic diseases, very advanced diseases. We have a lot of juicing as part of the program, a lot of cooked food, a lot of raw food, and they heal, they reverse their diseases. But they do arrive, usually if they stick with it long enough to reverse their disease, one day they call me, and all my clients do this, and they go, I get it. We are all one. We are all connected. This is not about reversing the disease. This is a spiritual endeavor. So, but I don't know if I could, if I had led with that first, if they would have, made the changes in their behavior and their lifestyle. They were scared. They didn't want to die from their disease. They didn't want to be put on any more medications. So it was very much a physical health related reason to make the changes. But I don't know. You just make me think about what if we did lead almost, and I hate to use the word religion, but leading from that spiritual state of being first, because we're also in a place in society where people are alone, they are lonely, they need community, they are more isolated than ever, and some people don't even care that they have a disease. Many of my clients say, I don't care, I'd rather just die instead of actually do the work to change my state of health. But what I think they're really calling for is spiritual connection.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't
Indeed.
know. I don't know. There's not one answer, I think. There's many answers and there's many paths to to that same end result. But this is one that I think is very, very important for this research.
I think what you're saying is it's very important to make the distinction between spiritual and religious,
Hmm.
because religion isn't the answer.
It's not about religion.
It's, yeah, it's about devotion. It's not about spirituality. Much of what we see in terms of the church is about devotion to the church, devotion to control, devotion to be involved in the economic and political um, um, activities that the church is advancing. Um, and I would that takes me back to, if I might digress just very slightly, back. I remember the first time I was in Ghana, and we they take you, of course, they take you to the coast, you see all the slave dungeons, etc. One of the things that was most poignant to me was they showed us they took us to the first Anglican church in Ghana, and that first Anglican church was literally in a slave castle. And so it said to me, well, they're teaching Christianity to people they're enslaving. And I've seen that over and over again. I think one of the things I notice here is that the people who are the most involved in the church have the worst diet. And that's
Yes.
what I've seen here. The religious you are, the worse you eat. And they're churchgoer. They're very religious. And when they go to church, they eat all this Tomasic food. People, I don't know how to do it.
Yeah, no, I think I got that. You cut out a little bit there, but I did understand that, which brings me back to what you said earlier. Eat like your grandparents, and eat like the peasants, but you got to eat like the original peasants going way back before colonization, before the introduction of these refined processed colonized foods. And you got to eat like the poor, like really the poor of the poor, the ones who only had access to the fruits and the vegetables off the trees and the bushes and the root vegetables, and really had, like, there was minimal to next to no processing. Um, but within that, we put out a documentary called The Grounded in My Roots, which is looking back to your ancestors to really see what they ate. But it was interesting because when I showed it to people of color, they immediately got it. They were like, oh, my granny used to cook this, and they remembered. But when I showed it to white people, they would say, but what if you don't have ancestors? Like, we don't have ancestors. Yeah. And I was like, what? You know, what do you mean you don't? Of course, even if you're Irish and Scottish and British and French, you have ancestors that go back, but you don't want to look to the wealthy religious people. You don't want to look to the wealthy royalty. You need to look back to the poor peasants to understand really the foods that heal the body and keep you free of disease. But I wonder if one of the major reasons why we also see these epidemic rates of these chronic diseases is just the fact that we don't have elders that remember those foods anymore.
Perhaps it is. I would say to you that it's not just the peasantry; it's the average person, who ate both ways. Only the hyper rich would eat that rich diet,
Mm,
um, and so not just the poor, but the working class average people would eat the plant based diet indigenously pre-colonial time. So yeah, I mean we have this image that prior to colonialism was a mass of poor. No, I mean there's people who were doing well. They were
hmm.
poor, but there were also people doing well, and
Right.
and they ate well too. They ate plant based as well. So
Yeah, and that
I think
you
culturally,
well, I was just it brought
go
up,
ahead.
there's a term that, we often hear people say that health is wealth. Right. But when you reverse that, what we are seeing and what we're saying right now is wealth is equal to poor health. And so, and with that lack of knowledge. And so the more wealthier you become, the more French cuisine restaurants you want to dine in on, which has more meat and more seafood, more of that Tomasic food that, you're paying for, but then you also pay the price in your health as well. So yeah, health is wealth, but wealth is not health.
Yeah, and it's not just actual having wealth; it's wanting to emulate wealth.
Mm,
Because that what we have the poor people here. They think if they eat a lot of barbecue meat, that they're acting like they're wealthy. They feel wealthy,
yeah,
but they're actually quite poor. Because
yeah.
I mean, it's, you're making $8 a day, and you come on the way home spend seven of it or three of it on one meal of meat. It's it's amazing how many people do that.
So, with the work that you do with your patients, with your clients, how do you start off the conversation with them, and especially while you were in the United States, you had 7.5 minute appointments, 15-minute appointments, and people are coming in for these preventable and reversible diseases. How did you start the dialogue off with them?
Well, when I was in my own private practice, I didn't have those types of appointments. My shortest appointment was an hour um, in my private practice. My initial appointment with people was 3 to 4 hours. So we would talk about everything. Um, One of my disillusions with standard medicine was that you only had those few medicines. I was living in the Bay Area and working for the East Bay, Alameda County um, um, medical system, and I worked in a large multidisciplinary clinic called Eastmont Medical Center, Eastmont Wellness Center. What a name! They had no idea what wellness meant, but it was put in a defunct shopping center. It was in the space of a Macy's or something. I mean, it's a huge clinic. I mean, it's like at any given time there are 25 or 30 doctors working in different specialties. And I remember I was working in the adult medicine department. At any given time, we'd have 5 doctors work, and we'd all sit in the same room, and we'd have our little desk, and we'd work at it. And it was busy as hell. And the nurses used to hate me because I would spend as much time with the patient as I had available. And so, um, but there was one doctor in particular who they loved him. He'd show up 45 minutes or an hour late and leave an hour early, but they loved him because he would be in and out with the patient. And frequently the patients had no idea what they were being treated for. They had no idea what their medicine is. They just here, take these pills, and he'd go in and out and leave. And interestingly enough, to show where that whole system was, that doctor won Doctor of the Year award. And whereas my medication usage was the lowest among people seeing adult medicine, and lower than many patients, many doctors seeing pediatrics. So I was in the low range of doctors who were seeing children, not just adults. And I got a lot of flack from that. The patients come in and they're not really expecting the doctor to talk to them. They're just not. And interesting enough, here in Tanzania, in Arusha, the doctor doesn't even touch them. Most patients have never been touched, but physically contacted by them. They only shake their hand. We're not talking about take their blood pressure, examine them. They don't even touch. Most of the doctors don't even have a stethoscope here
Wow.
in the government hospital. They don't carry a stethoscope.
Who
Right.
does who does their checks then? Like, what's happening?
They aren't touched. You know,
So this is what
they might
I've
have their blood pressure taken by the nurse, but they don't get a physical exam.
Yeah, and this is something I've read a lot about narrative medicine in my research over the last, 15 years, and how, like you said, you would get a patient and you would talk to them, your appointments are 3 hours long, or as much time as needed. And where you get to hear the stories of your patients, you get to talk to them and get to know them. And within that, there's so much information so that you get to understand, okay, what would be the treatment for that person with diabetes? For one, it just might be lack of knowledge. For another one, it's community needed. Another one, it's spiritual connection. Another one, it's trauma, right? We know a lot of people with diabetes have a long history of colonial trauma, intergenerational trauma. So then when you hear this through the practice of communication and narrative medicine, then you can appropriately, you know, treat or work with that patient. Whereas it's true, like here too, doctors don't even look up from their computer. They just have to look at their computer and take notes while they ask
Yeah.
questions. They're not even looking at the
Yeah.
patient. So I see
Hmm.
that. Yeah, that's huge.
Right.
Yeah. So the actual act
So
of how
I mean,
medicine
how
is
do you
practiced.
within the going to see? I mean, I remember in public health school, one of the most influential writers I read was Ivan Illich and his book Medical Nemesis.
Hmm.
And since then, what he wrote in that has panned out true is that essentially, for the medical system is more harmful than it's good to begin with. So going to see a doctor is actually, for most patients, most people, you're worse off going to the doctor than not going to the doctor. And that's, I mean, I say I say it quite clearly, and I say that with the numbers, because if you look at the cause of morbidity and mortality in the United States, the doctors are the number three cause.
Yes.
By direct intervention from doctors is the number three cause of death. And I could play that out further, and you could put up a reference for that. But so if you don't have heart disease or cancer, then by going to see a doctor, you're increasing your rate of dying.
Yeah.
Because if you didn't go see a doctor, you wouldn't have that third cause. And even if you do have heart attack, or heart disease or cancer, you're still not likely to get healed by going to see a doctor to begin with. So seeing a doctor, in my mind, is not the answer to getting healthy. You're best avoiding MDs. You're best avoiding doctors in general, whether that be chiropractors, acupuncturists, herbalists, anyone. The best thing you could do is to take care of your own health, is to listen to what your body's telling you, take care of yourself properly, learn to take care of yourself properly.
Okay, so
Yeah.
that brings up another really interesting point, which I have to ask your opinion. Today in 2022, do humans have enough intuition and that self-awareness to be able to look within, given the vast amount of marketing over the last 100 years in the food sector, given the vast amount of marketing by the pharmaceutical industry, given the fact that we've put doctors on a pedestal as knowing everything there is to know about the human body. So, we've done this. So, are we just a shell of a human now, or can we access that intuition? Because I know when people say to me, "Well, I'm craving meat, so I'm going to eat meat," and they think that's their intuition talking to them, and like,
Well,
so I don't know, like, well, I don't know. What do you think about that?
well, I think if you're not in touch with your true spiritual nature, then what's in the matrix is going to overwhelm you. The matrix being that which is around you, the public, the mass media, the schools, the churches, etc. They're going to overwhelm you with their information and confuse you and keep you in a delusional state. Um, so, and that's what they're very good at, and they practice that, and that is their goal, to separate you from your essence, your spiritual essence. So if, however, you are in touch with your spiritual essence, we as human beings have intuition. You might call that instinct in animals.
Mhm.
We intuitively understand, know what to take, know what to do. We, through our, I call it ancestral memory. Others might call it epigenetics. Um, we understand what we must do to stay healthy and to be healthy, and we understand and know on a deep knowledge level what will happen if we don't take care of ourselves. Follow what I call your rule book and user guide for healthy living,
Oh, nice. Yeah.
and that's actually the title of my book. I'm working on the second edition now, called the Rule Book and User Guide for Healthy Living.
Yeah.
You know what's going to happen if you intuitively, on a deep cellular level, understand what you need to do to stay healthy. And if you are in touch with your essence, you're gonna automatically start looking to do those things to make you. It's built in, just like you know animals know how. Why do we think we? Why do we suddenly think human beings don't qualify with the basic wisdom of other animals have? Animals know when to migrate. They know when to do what, et cetera. They know what to eat. They know what to do, and they get that from other animals for sure. It's built in. They know it's built into us too. If we basically follow what our minds, not what our observational skills from just paying attention to what our bodies are telling. That's the power. One of the power of meditation that I think is extremely powerful. Specifically, Vipassana teaches you to pay attention to your bodily sensation. I mean, if you are able to listen to and pay attention closely to and respond to the messages that you're getting through your body, through your intuition, through your dream state, and do what you need to do, you're going to naturally gravitate to a healthy state. You don't need a doctor. You don't need anyone else. You don't need me or any other doctor. You don't need a naturopath. They don't need you, Nicolette. They don't need anybody. We don't need any of us. And that's the beauty of the wisdom that is built into us. That is the beauty of our spiritual connection with divine knowledge and divine information. And that's why we're sick. Ultimately, we've lost that connection. Once we restore our connection with spirit, restore our connection with divine wisdom and divine ways, natural ways of being, we're going to naturally gravitate towards doing things that are healthy, naturally move away from addictive things, and we're going to naturally refuse and slough off being enslaved through wage slavery or chattel slavery, or accepting a colonial imposition of a colonial structure to exploit our labor and our land. We'll just naturally, we just can't, it just won't work. And that's why when you go to areas that are colonized, the institutions that they put in there are designed to falsify your consciousness. Mm-hmm. Churches and schools. That's where they put the money into. And that's why when the colonists come in, they come in with guns and Bibles, because they understand that they've got this. In order to impose a colonial state on people, they have to disconnect us from our spiritual connection to all that is sacred, which is nature. And that's the only way they can get us to accept living in these ways and doing things that are in violation of our own people, our own land, and in service of those who come over to take over and dominate us.
Yeah, it's interesting. I've been teaching, metabolic nutrition and detoxification for the last 15 years to my clients. And that's what I lead with, right? It's the thing that I can hold, it's tangible. I can bring my clients into the kitchen and we can chop vegetables together, and it's, they can leave with these skills. But this conversation with you has led me to realize that I need to add very many more days onto all of my workshops and my sessions with my clients to really just sit with them and to allow them to feel and allow them to get in touch with themselves and that intuitive nature. And by doing that, I know that their healing will happen so much faster. And I mean, it's hard to be everything to everyone, right? Like there's so many complex aspects. And for some of my clients, poverty is literally one of the things that prevents them from being able to access healthy food. where their food budgets are like $47 a month. And I'm like, okay, what can you do for 47 or $147 a month? Okay, so like eat potatoes and eat collard greens and eat that. But they've come to believe that it's cheaper to eat the fast food than it is to eat those whole foods. So sometimes we're dealing with the economic, but you have made me in this, hour and 18 minutes together, um, really want to, yeah, just rework how I do everything with my clients and really address
The
this.
thing is that when people come to you, one of the things I realized when I was working with people, they come with an expectation.
Yes.
And if you don't give them that expectation, no matter what you give them, they're going to be unsatisfied. And they're not
Hmm.
going to come back and not going to send you people.
Right. That's true.
And so, um, but often that expectation is not what they need to get what they want, what they think they want. Does that make sense?
No, it does. And it's true. My clients come to me because they get results. They don't have to come back because they've gotten results. So they don't have to be bounced around the medical system. They don't need to be bounced around between different practitioners, whether it's naturopaths or, even Ayurvedic medicine or, traditional. They know what to eat. They know how to shop again. They know how, they know what to put in their body. So then they tell other people, and so for me it's been rewarding. I know for them it's been rewarding, but I do want to have this closer connection to my clients and to really.
What you have, if I may interject, you have a subset, you have a section of the population that selects what you do because of how you do it.
Mhm.
But that's a very tiny percentage
Yeah.
that will choose the work that you're doing and the work that I do.
Hmm.
Um, so if we're trying to make a dent in the public health issue, you got those 80% of people. They're not looking for anything weird. They're
No.
not looking for anything odd. They want to go to a doctor. They want a pill. They want to get the hell out of there and try to spend as little time as possible. And they're not looking to be empowered in themselves. They're not looking to learn anything. They're looking to solve their problem.
Hmm.
Their problem is they're afraid because someone told them, you're going to get the sugar, you're going to get the pressure, you're going to get the cancer. And if you don't go to your doctor, you're gonna get sick and die. And so that's their concept. And so their concept is go to the doctor. I've got a pill, and that's solving the problem. And that's what people have been conditioned to. And if you're not, but 80% of the people, if not more, and then another 15%, they will talk about doing other stuff, talk about getting nutrition. They'll talk about learning to become vegetarian. They'll talk about learning to meditate. They'll talk about doing yoga, but they'll never do it. There's
Hmm.
only 5% of people who are going to come to you anyway and are going to make a change. You may be, so what I found is that I found 3/4 of the people, only that top 20% would ever even think about coming to me to begin with. And then 3/4 of the people will talk about it all day. They'll agree, yeah, blah, 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 blah. Yeah, that's right. But 3/4 of that 15% or 15% of 20 is 3/4 of the patients that 20% that would possibly come to see me. They're not going to do anything anyway.
Hmm.
So people ask, what kind of success rate do you have in treating this, that, or the other? I said, it's dismal. It's dismal because most people don't follow the advice I
Yeah.
give them. And so if you come in and you actually do what I suggest you do, and here's the other thing, that 5%, 1 out of 20 people, they've already been searching before they come.
That's 100% true.
They
Yeah.
are, and many of them, they know more than I know.
Yeah.
And they come in and ask, well, look, I should be paying you.
I get that all the time.
Because you know more than I know.
Yeah.
So why are you coming to see me? Don't come to see me. Just do what you know already.
Yeah.
So it's a tough situation that we find ourselves in. Where we find that the changes. If we can get the mass of society to be pushing people where the average person, what, you're eating meat? Why would you do that? Everybody knows eating meat is bad for you. And everybody they know doesn't eat meat. Then no one will eat meat. This is
Yeah.
simple. But as
Yeah.
long as the mass majority of people eating meat and is connected with being a part of the group that people identify with, they're going to keep doing it. And I don't think, maybe I'm cynical. I don't think there's much we can do about it. The group that we're trying to work with is that 20%, and try and make it, instead of only 1 out of 4 actually will make a change. Move that up to 1 out of 2 will make the change. If that's where that's where the work is going to happen. And to me, that's profoundly sad.
Well,
and I don't have an answer for it.
yeah. And within what you just said there, one of the pieces I just pulled out of that I actually haven't thought about is, we've gone from the 1920s in North America of not really having cars. Everything was basically horse and carriages up until that point. No real laws and policies, lots of gun fighting and people just shooting each other if they wanted to now with all of this technology that we have in 100 short years, that I wonder too if there's an element, because you said when people come to you, they often already have a lot of the knowledge that you have, or even know more. And that does happen to me as well, but the people are not practicing it. And sometimes my clients will hear what I have to say, and then they'll go, oh my gosh, I did this 20 years ago. I ate this way for like a few months or a year or 2 years, and it was the best I ever felt in my life. And I look at them and I'm like, how did you forget that period in your life when you felt so good and you ate this way and completely forget about it? Which makes me also think human beings now, and I don't know how different it is from 100 years ago and 500 years ago and a million years ago. Do we just crave novelty? We just want that new thing that's going to be the thing, whether it's the one pill wonder or the cleanse or the diet is it just craving novelty, craving novelty that also prevents us from, eating this way, this clean way, this simple way, the way that keeps us free of chronic disease?
Yeah, I think there's something to that. It's a medical consumerism. It's a nutritionist entertainment.
Hmm.
Um, and so we feel entitled to be entertained. And we feel like if our food isn't entertaining, our food isn't interesting, then we don't want it. It's not worthwhile.
Hmm.
And the easiest way to make it entertaining and interesting is to make it addictive.
Yeah.
So you just bliss point people out, and it's very entertaining. Dopamine release every time you eat it. It's like, hey. So I don't know what the answer. And hopefully, one of the things that intrigued me about the direction which you're going is essentially the questions that need to be answered. How do you make change happen? And I pray that you gather insight and you're able to synthesize things in such a way that there are action steps that those of us who are interested in actually making an impact can take, actually make a benefit. Things that we've forgotten, things that we've overlooked, things that we don't do, or things that we do that we don't emphasize enough. And I'm praying that you're going to you're going to make an impact on that. And that's why I'm sitting here today, and I'm just basically laying out to you as plainly and as I can what I think is going on.
Well, I have to thank you for taking this time. I know you're across the other side of the world in East Africa, and you have taken this time to share, what has been, I've been referring to them as gold nuggets, but I hate using that term because of the connotation of gold and what that means within our economic system as well. But so, these beautiful pieces that you have contributed, they are novel ideas that I haven't found in all of the literature that I've read over the last 7 years of doing my doctorate. And so, and I do want to do that, pull the pieces out and turn them into action steps. And, obviously, I don't know which one I would start with first beyond what I'm currently already doing in my life, but there are so many pieces here that absolutely need to be addressed when working with clients, when building out programs for schools like we do, when building out programs, for physicians like we do. And so there's a lot more elements here that I would love to include in the work that I do, that if I hadn't interviewed you, I would never, ever, I don't think, come up with some of these pieces myself. So I do have to thank you for taking
Well,
the
good.
time.
I'm glad to have been of help.
Yes, no, thank you. Are there any last words of wisdom, of advice that you want to leave our audience? Our podcast is heard in over 187 different countries. We have people from all walks of life listening to our podcast. They listen to the full hour and a half shows that we put out there. What would you like to leave our audience with today?
Well, no personal appearance would be complete without brazen self-promotion. So you can find me at opare.net, 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 or .com, but I like opare.net. And then you can see it's a basic introduction to the work that I do. And we do, I do take consultations by Zoom or WhatsApp remotely, and that's the majority of people that I do consults with is remotely now. And I do have 2 books actually out now. My first is the Rule Book and User Guide for Healthy Living that outlines the Rule Book and User Guide paradigm that I talked about, and a lot of other different topics. And then the other one is called the Optimum Fast, which is a handbook on how to do the juice fasting protocol that I use with my patients. And then I've got a blog and a blog on my site as well. So that's opare.net, and you can. That's how you found me, through the contact form or book a consultation. And it's a nice site, and I think people will enjoy it. Also, there's put a plug in for Tanzania. Come visit northern Tanzania. It's wonderful. People think of Africa is sweaty and hot, but we live in a tropical alpine climate, and it goes down into the 60s, sometimes the 50s every night, and rarely gets above 80. And it's lush, it's green, and Arusha is the landing ground for safaris of all kinds. Arusha National Park is just up the road from me. It's a wonderful place. See all types of animals, and it's amazing. And it's probably the easiest, very high mountain to climb anywhere in the world. If you can hike, and tolerate the altitude, you can climb Mount Kilimanjaro, the highest point in Africa. There's no technical climbing at all to get up Mount Kilimanjaro. And it's just a hair under 20,000 feet. And then to to the west is Serengeti, Ngorongoro Crater, Tarangire National Park, Lake Nyasa. It's just a wonderful place for outgoing. And then, of course, once you've had this part, then you can take a short flight down to the coast and enjoy the tropical island paradise of Zanzibar, and chill out and have a great time on the beach. So yeah, Tanzania is a great place to visit, and y'all come on down now. Yeah.
I love it. I love it. Well, I am going to come to Tanzania because Malawi is just a hop, skip, and a jump away, and that's where my family is. And so when I do come to Tanzania, I do hope to come and meet you in person, Dr. Opare, and we're going to put all the links
Love
to your
to see you.
books. Yes, would love to see you. Thank you. And we're going to put all the links to your books so everybody can
Malawi
access
about borders
them.
Tanzania.
It is. We share the same lake. Lake
Yes,
Nyasa,
Lake
isn't
Malawi.
that correct? Yeah, Lake Malawi.
Nyasa.
Yep. Yeah, it's
Oh,
yeah,
I think.
yeah, no, so definitely going to put the links in the show notes below and make sure that people can find you because you are a beautiful, rare gem in this world that has such a vast
Oh,
history
thank
of
you.
knowledge. And the fact that you are sharing that knowledge with so many people, it's just a very beyond generous, caring, compassionate thing in the world to be doing, and we just need more and more people like you doing exactly
Thank
that.
you.
So
Thank you
thank
so
you.
much for the work you're doing as well.
Thank you.
I appreciate that very much. So
Yeah,
keep on keeping on what you're doing.
Thank you. I will, and I know you will too.